Hello. Hopefully you can hear me. Um, so my name is Elliot, and welcome to what is going to be the nature book review on the Kingston Library and Heritage live stream service. Um, so the first thing to say is thank you so much to the Kingston Library team who've done amazing work over the last sort of week or so, just putting together an amazing jam-packed agenda full of some really good events that you can get engaged with while sitting at home or you're trying to find things to do and entertain yourselves while on this sort of period of uncertainty that we find ourselves. And what better way to sort of fill your time than reading? And the library has an amazing sort of catalogue of online services that you can gain from loads of resources from books and ebooks that you can listen to or read, and yeah, to really keep your mind ticking away in this pretty tricky time. So, my job in the council is what you call the biodiversity officer. So, it's my job to try and make Kingston as good for wildlife and for the community, because wildlife is a great part of the community, as possible. So, what we thought would be a good idea is I've gone through uh, some of the books that you can download from the library service. And I've put four of my favourite sort of nature books that you can download and access to keep yourselves entertained. So I've chosen four books, and the first one that I've chosen is this one. And this is a really, really lovely book. It's called Wohlleben. It's by Isabella Tree, and it's a bestseller. So far, they've sold about 200,000 copies of this book, and to my mind, it's one of the best nature books that you can buy at the moment, or just read at the moment. Download, of course. So, and what it's about the Net Estate, which is a 3,500 acre estate in West Sussex, owned by Charlie Burrell and Isabella Tree. And this is a story of how they turned this unproductive farm into an absolute thriving place for wildlife. And what they've used is a rewilding narrative to do that. So this farm wasn't overly productive. So what they did, they engaged with experts from around the world and across the UK to sort of show them how they can make it better for wildlife. And they sort of took their hands off the steering wheel and tried to let nature take its course. The thing I really loved about this book was the way in which Isabella Tree beautifully conveys the sort of process and the natural world. It's so accessible, it's so easy to read, and it just really opens your eyes up to how nature can work perfectly well without us having to meddle in all these little in all these little bits and crannies. So basically, what they did, they tried to follow what you call a Pleistocene sort of rewilding model, and that is where they got sort of animals that used to roam the UK before we domesticated and sort of made things go extinct, and sort of reintroduced sort of analogues of those animals. So what they did, they put Exmoor ponies, and these represented things called tarpan, which were wild horses that used to roam Europe. They put in pigs, which represented the wild boar that used to roam around and have a really important ecological function, because pigs and wild boar are really strong nosed, and what they do, they can root around on the ground, and they can really change the sort of mosaic sort of the sward structure and the ground, and help encourage loads of wildflowers and stuff to come up and really increase the biodiverse value of the sort of sward the wildflowers and all that sort of stuff. And there was also introduced longhorn cattle, and these represent auroch, which were these sort of pre-domesticated cattle that used to roam around sort of the Pleistocene, the Ice Age. So really amazing sort of elements, and you learn so many amazing things when you read this book. Not only from an ecological perspective, it's also from a sort of a social perspective, how they had to engage with big authorities like Natural England and the local farming community to try and get them on board with what they were doing. Because at the time, it was, and still is, it's very much a pioneering project. But it really is now one of the most successful conservation projects that the UK has ever seen. And it really has brought together what we call the rewilding community, and people are now trying to emulate what they have done at the Neff estate and try and do that across places all across the UK, which is a really, really positive thing. It shows you how we can try and make our farming more sort of potentially in some places more wildlife friendly, more potentially economically prosperous, and more social values. So once we're merging out, well, I definitely encourage you to read this book now. But once you've once we are emerging from this uncertain period of coronavirus, it's a really great place to go and visit as well. You can go and visit there. Obviously, the car parks are closed at the moment to try and not encourage people to go. But once we're through this period of this pandemic that we're currently in, go down there and enjoy it. They've just released white storks, which are a real bird of hope, and they've just got their beaver license too. So hopefully there'll be beavers in their stream. So an amazing place, an amazing read, and it really has transformed sort of a lot of the conservation in the UK at the moment. And I really recommend it to everybody to read. And maybe even in Kingston, we can learn some of the from some of the lessons that they have sort of really pioneered and researched. The next book that I recommend that you download from the library service is this one. It's called What Has Nature Ever Done for Us? And it's by the author is called Tony Juniper. And he, at the time of writing, was an environmental sort of activist, a really sort of loud voice in the English sort of landscape of environmentalists. Before he wrote this book, he was the director of Friends of the Earth. But now Tony Juniper has actually got the interesting position of the chair of Natural England. And Natural England are the sort of public body that are the government advisory body to the government about all things nature. And again, so I think Tony, when he was trying to write this book, he recognized that biodiversity in nature sometimes maybe isn't at the forefront of people's minds when we're making policy and financial decisions, because nature doesn't really conform to the sort of economic structures that we are built around. So what Tony is trying to do in this book is really show you what the value of nature is and how important nature is to absolutely everybody. And I think now more than ever we can see how important that is. Just as like a headline figure that he describes in this book, that nature has a value of about 100 trillion dollars to the world's economy, and then that is probably an understatement. But this book is fascinating. Again, it's really accessible, really easy to read, and it just takes you through different elements of ecosystems and nature and tries to sort of prescribe an economic value to it. It starts with things like soil and pollination and the importance of our seas, and just saying how important it is to not only sort of our food security but our economies, and how we really need to look after this and acknowledge the value of this nature that is the life support system of our planet, and without it we wouldn't be able to exist. Imagine the Earth without soil, we would be effectively Mars, so with no ability to grow food or any sort of vegetation. But I suppose the two favourite chapters that I have in this book are the last two chapters. One of those chapters is called the Natural Health Service. Obviously, at the moment, the NHS are doing an absolutely amazing effort to get us through the situation in which we found ourselves. And I hope everybody engaged last night at 8 o'clock, clapping outside our doorsteps. But I think one thing we can also recognise is the power that the natural world has for our own personal well-being. I just try and get some figures up, because one thing that Tony does really well throughout this book is prescribing numbers and sort of financial values to it, which can sometimes be seen a little bit reductionist, but I think is a really important way of trying to get the true message across to how important it is. So in the book it says that to the NHS at the moment there's probably about £105 billion spent in the NHS on mental health, and about £630 million spent on maintaining our green spaces. But our green spaces, when we engage with them, I think is absolutely proven, unequivocally has so many positive and psychological well-being benefits for ourselves, and it really well justifies that. So by getting outside and just enjoying the natural world responsibly can have so many benefits to our physical and mental well-being. So that is a really good element of the book. And then the last chapter is it's all about how the economy can potentially change and adapt and recognize nature more. So again, a really good book, really accessible, and written by one of the most important people in British conservation at the moment. So yes, very easy to download. I'd also obviously suggest that one. The next book is probably the most magical book that magical from a non-fictional point of view, but it's this book. It's called The Hidden Life of Trees, and it's by somebody called Peter Wohlleben, and he is a German forester. So he's lived his entire life out in working as a forester in Germany in these huge beech forests, and it's basically his story about how what he has learned about the amazing things that we call trees, and really sheds a whole new light on it. I think once you read this book, you'll never look at a tree in the same way again. I certainly don't. And what a way I think something that he really, really does well is, again, like all the books I'll recommend through this little session, it is a really, really accessible read. So you don't need any ecological background when you're going into this book at all. I would say he quite anthropomorphizes trees. So they become almost not just sort of living structures over there, but living structures that we can identify with. So a lot of this book is about how trees are and woodlands are communities. And in these communities, they look after each other to some extent with the root structures and the mycorrhizal sort of fungi that's underground that we're only just starting to learn about. It can, an injured, a sort of a poorly tree, so to speak, can receive nutrients from other trees around it. And also, trees can communicate with each other to some extent. So they can release chemicals into the air, which can warn other trees about sort of incoming sort of infestations of things like parasitic beetles and stuff. So the trees are working together in a way that we might not always have seen. So again, a really accessible book. And it really, again, is amazingly well written. It's actually been translated from German, I believe, not unsurprisingly. But again, I really, really would suggest you read it. And one of the stories that I really like from this book that I like to tell when I go out and do nature walks is the story between the woodpecker and the bat. So the woodpecker was obviously a bird that we can hear when you're maybe going around, when you're half an hour walk that you might be taking, or one walk of exercise a day for a green space that hopefully you're taking into account, obviously, government social distancing guidelines. But woodpeckers are one of our only sort of birds that can actually create these holes in the trees, and then that is when they're in these holes, that is where they lay their eggs in the spring. So this is a good time you might be hearing woodpeckers and seeing woodpeckers exhibiting that sort of behaviour. But a woodpecker is a very, very clean bird. It will never go back to the same hole after the second year. It'll always make a new hole every year, every year, to avoid sort of the bacteria and sort of viruses that might have built up within its hole. So it's leaving these holes around the woodland, and other species like fungi and bats are then reliant on this. So, and he describes these sort of these cascading sort of events that just, and shows you how all these forests and woodlands are interlinked systems, and does it in a really, really engaging way. And as I say, yeah, I think an amazing book and a must read at the moment. The last book that I would recommend to you guys is probably more along the lines of the second book that I was talking about, the Tony Juniper book. It's quite a serious book, but again, I would very much say it's a must read, especially in the sort of time of climate change that we find ourselves. So climate change is obviously a very big deal that everybody should be aware of and acknowledging. And this book really introduces you to the science. And the book is called The Uninhabitable Earth, and it's by Wallace Wells, and he's an editor for the New York Magazine. And basically, this book is an amalgamation of all the sort of scientific sort of literature that's around there at the moment, and tries to bring it together in a really easily accessible way for people to try and understand what is a very confusing time for people trying to understand what is going on. There's so many sort of statements about climate change, but when you really try and understand what is going on, it might be in sort of a haze of uncertainty and clarity. So what David Wallace Wells done, again, a very easy to read book, and one of the most powerful chapters in this book is actually the opening chapter, which just sort of lays the context and sort of sets the situation and sort of describes the severity of climate change and how it can impact us all and future generations. And then the book goes on to tackle different issues from flooding to famine to wildfires, predicting almost what we saw earlier this year in Australia and across the world, air pollution. And what he does, he just collates all the sort of scientific models, the data that we have at the moment available to us, and just predicts without change if we're seeing potentially, hopefully not, but 3 degrees of global temperature rising, the impacts that we will see on society, which would be absolutely, unfortunately, devastating. So I really think this book helps to sort of focus the mind and show you what the actual situation is and can be. Obviously, these are scientific models, so we're not entirely sure if it's going to be the exact. It might not be what actually happens. We might be able to put ourselves on another course, hopefully. And it's not, even though it might sound like quite an overwhelming and depressing book, I would say that's not the case at all. When I read it for the first time, I did feel a little bit overwhelmed trying to comprehend some of these sort of predictions that he was making. But throughout the book, there's also tones of hope and what we can do, sort of interventions we can make now as a society, as communities, from technologies we can implement to ways in which we can change our lives, to get ourselves onto a different sort of course, a different sort of trajectory, really, to sort of ensure that our planet is in the best possible condition for future generations to support the amazing variety of life that is out there. So again, a really interesting read. It's not full of doom and gloom. There's definitely hope in there. I suppose one thing that I would like to see more in this book is more of the nature-based solutions. A lot of them are sort of technical solutions, even though nature-based solutions do get mentioned. But again, a really important book. It's actually been referred to as the Silent Spring of our time. So Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which was an absolutely game-changing book about a quarter of a century ago, or half a century ago. Sorry, but yeah, a really important book. And if you've got we all have the opportunity now to sort of reflect on the world as it is, and this is a really good way of trying to sort of cut through the sort of fake news, so to speak, and just understand the situation as it is. So they were the four books that I wanted to sort of take you through. I did 5 minutes on each. I suppose being a live session, if anybody's out there and have any questions about some other nature books that they might want to read, or if they might have read these books or have questions about them, please do comment now and I can try and answer some. But yeah, hopefully you found that a somewhat introduction to some of the really interesting books, the way you can keep your mind going through and busy. And who knows, by reading these, if we've got lots of people to read these, we might even help to shape a more positive future, which would be a really, really positive thing. Yes. So I'm one thing to say is, following this live stream, with the library services are going to put out a new program for all the events, digital events that you can engage with through your computers. over the coming days. So please do bear that in mind. And do enjoy it. I've just been asked by Laura Hazel, which is my favourite book, and it is a book that I started with, and that is The Wohlleben book by Isabella. So if I was going to say, if you really wanted a book that will open your eyes up to the natural world around you and just really give you some really interesting facts, and just it is a fantastic, not just the way in which it is written, just the way in which it conveys the natural world around us. It is absolutely beautiful. So please do, if you can, have the time, give Wohlleben a read. And as I say, hopefully it might even help to inform some of the Kingston strategies that hopefully we can put forward on some of our green spaces in the future. But as I say, I hope you found that useful, entertaining. Please do. If you've got any questions about the natural world in Kingston, or what my role is, other than trying to suggest books, you can always email me. My name is elliot.newton@kingston.gov.uk. So please do send me an email about any questions you might have. But as I say, I hope you all found that quite enjoyable. And unless there's any other questions, I will let it go there. So stay safe, and well done again to the library team for doing these amazing events. Bye for now.